Making headlines for this week of January 29th, the Mohawk Initiative, Indigenous nation using legal proof to reclaim lands for Indigenous worldwide. 6 years late, 2010 IMF reforms are finally activated and BRICS countries are beneficiaries. Possible Brexit, threat of UK leaving EU is a major concern of US-controlled IMF, and X-Files ×2. CIA released their own X-Files ahead of the relaunch of anticipated program on disclosure.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
As reported over the last couple of weeks, attention is being drawn back to the story of the Grand River Mohawks, located near Brantford, Ontario, roughly 1 hour west of Toronto. This story will be a complicated one, and when I say this, I do not mean to imply that the complication is unique to the Grand River Mohawks. The story of the abuse of countless Indigenous tribes worldwide has been complicated. The story of the enslavement of humanity in general, as many are now learning, is incredibly complicated. There are numerous issues that are being brought to the attention of many people, and some of those people are not able to connect the dots of the issues that they happen to be passionate about with so many other issues. This group, known as the Global Cabal, has been ingenious in finding ways to keep people distracted on multiple levels, while giving them the illusion that they are living in a free and democratic society. Although perhaps slightly true up to a point, the vast majority are only now beginning to see and understand the extent of the enslavement to which humanity has been kept. Over the coming weeks, as this story is being told, CVN is going to try its best to tell the story in a way that can be followed by the listeners. The transcript to these stories will be posted in the show summary for people to read for greater clarity, and supporting documentation such as diagrams will be posted if they are provided to CVN. As was reported last week, there is a brewing local-level controversy that, to some listeners, may not seem important because it is affecting only one group of Indigenous people in one location. This, however, would be a misinterpretation because the issues that are now being brought into the light by the Grand River Mohawks in their area have profound implications worldwide and also upon numerous very prominent people in global affairs. On various levels, this story has the potential to touch almost every continent because abuse of the Grand River Mohawks was committed by many of the same entities, directly or indirectly connected to others who have been responsible for the enslavement of humanity and the destruction of our planet for profit, power, and greed. The story is about some Mohawks of 3 villages and their allies whose attachment to Crown treaties caused them to work together to protect the Grand River Territory and what was left of the Ganadahele, the traditional Five Nations hunting grounds with the British up until after the War of 1812, long before Canada became known. The Haldimand territory was nearly 1 million acres and partially leased, earning revenue for the Mohawks and others of the formerly American Six Nations at the end of hostilities. Power of attorney was vested by Six Nations, chiefs, warriors, and clan mothers, to Joseph Brant, a Grand River Mohawk, and one of the original founders of the League of Peace. Within the next decades following Brant's death, that territory would be reduced to Reservation Number 40, administered by the Six Nations Elected Band Council under federal laws such as the Indian Act. What makes this story important is that, finally, an Indigenous nation that is still truly free has the legal proof to expose the fraud and corruption. But it is also a nation that has committed to opening doors with other Indigenous nations and even national governments to begin implementing plans to rebuild this planet and restore lands and freedoms to not only Indigenous nations, but to any human seeking to live under the great tree of peace, in harmony and unity, not only with others, but also in sacred bond to the earth that sustains us. This particular story starts in Canada, but it can link to virtually any other case of abuse towards Indigenous peoples, their earth wisdom, or their earth-honoring traditions. They are not unique, but little by little their voices are once again uniting under the possibility that maybe this global cabal can be shut down once and for all, and it begins here, and it begins now. Before we begin, let's take a look at an example of Indigenous racism in Australia. One scandal that broke out last August involving a celebrated Indigenous Aussie rules footballer named Adam Goodes. Goodes' Indigenous mother has her ancestry linked to 2 tribes in Australia. The full controversy involving Goodes can be read in a link in the show summary. The controversy appears to have started when a young football fan called Goodes an ape. Goodes pointed the fan out to security, who had her removed. She was 13 years of age. There were apologies, including from the young girl. Goodes, although hurt, encouraged the community to stand behind the young girl and not to blame her. His pride in celebrating Indigenous connections continued to bring repeated rounds of booing despite his success as a player. Eventually, the stress forced him into retirement despite apologies from the club that they do not support racism. Stan Grant, an Indigenous journalist from the Wiradjuri tribe in New South Wales, wrote of the controversy last year and won an award for his work, describing the effects of the booing on the hearts and ears of the Indigenous people. At the same time, he was invited to speak on a debate program where the question focused on racism in Australia. The video of that speech was released online by the Ethics Centre that sponsored the debate, and the video has gone viral, and this video was only released last week. An article appearing on the London Guardian website by Melissa Davey on January 24th reports on the story that has taken on a new importance in Australia. The article contains excerpts of the speech made by Stan Grant that has gone viral. According to the article, as of the day it was printed, the video had received over 850,000 views and 28,000 shares via Facebook and had been viewed more than 50,000 times total on different uploads of the speech by the evening of the 24th on YouTube.
I can't speak for what lay in the hearts of the people who booed Adam Goodes. But I can tell you what we heard when we heard those boos. We heard a sound that was very familiar to us. We heard a howl. We heard a howl of humiliation that echoes across 2 centuries of dispossession, injustice, suffering and survival. We heard the howl of the Australian dream, and it said to us again, "You're not welcome." The Australian dream. We sing of it, and we recite it in verse. Australians all, let us rejoice, for we are young and free. My people die young in this country. We die 10 years younger than average Australians, and we are far from free. We are fewer than 3% of the Australian population, and yet we are 25%, a quarter of those Australians, locked up in our prisons. And if you are a juvenile, it is worse, it is 50%. An Indigenous child is more likely to be locked up in prison than they are to finish high school. In 1963, when I was born, I was counted among the flora and fauna, not among the citizens of this country. Now, you will hear things tonight, you will hear people say, "But you've done well." Yes, I have, and I'm proud of it. And why have I done well? I've done well because of who has come before me. My father, who lost the tips of 3 fingers working in sawmills to put food on our table because he was denied an education. My grandfather, who served to fight wars for this country when he was not yet a citizen and came back to a segregated land where he couldn't even share a drink with his digger mates in the pub because he was black. My great-grandfather, who was Jailed for speaking his language to his grandson, my father. Jailed for it. My grandfather on my mother's side, who married a white woman who reached out to Australia, lived on the fringes of town until the police came, put a gun to his head, bulldozed his tin humpy and ran over the graves of the 3 children he buried there. Of course racism is killing the Australian dream. It is self-evident that it's killing the Australian dream. But we are better than that. The people who stood up and supported Adam Goodes and said no more, they are better than that. The people who marched across the bridge for reconciliation, they are better than that. The people who supported Kevin Rudd when he said sorry to the stolen generations, they are better than that. My children and their non-Indigenous friends are better than that. My wife, who is non-Indigenous, is better than that. And one day I want to stand here and be able to say as proudly and sing as loudly as anyone else in this room, Australians all, let us rejoice. Thank you.
The article closes noting that the media commentator and writer Mike Carlton described Grant's address as Australia's Martin Luther King moment, and Stan Grant was still trending on Twitter the Sunday morning. Grant sums up the Australian version well, but it is a story that could be told in many countries with local variations, and it is happening across Canada and with the Grand River Mohawks. Until now, Indigenous tribes have either had to surrender their rights and freedoms to various corporate or legal entities in order to receive any kind of recognition from national governments. Indigenous tribes that retained their natural status as free humans were not acknowledged, and in the case of the Grand River Mohawks, were just treated as corporate entities and had their land stolen because the government and its partner entities thought that they could get away with it without getting caught. At least part of the reason for the cabal attempts to suppress Indigenous groups is for pretty much the same reason as they attempt to dumb down and harm children through dangerous vaccines, violent video games, and super unhealthy foods. It comes down to fear. The cabal establishment fears what today's younger children and Indigenous cultures represent, an awakening of humanity's deeper spiritual inner power. Very few Indigenous tribes, if any, have had any kind of legal footing to stand upon to exert their rights and freedoms according to their status as natural beings, free from the corporate entity enslavement. Until now. The Grand River Mohawks have all the pieces to make a lawful claim, not only for their own lands, but also a claim on behalf of Indigenous tribes worldwide and humanity in general. It is all connected in ways that are more profound than most will fully be able to grasp right away. And to stretch it even further, these connections go beyond human consciousness and beyond even our planet to include civilizations and technologies beyond Earth and awareness that transcends the current human fourth dimension perception of it. That, however, is further down the road. What is happening this week is this. In Brantford, there is a controversial land transfer that was expected to close on the 28th. This land was to transfer from Brant County to the city of Brantford itself. All the information about this land deal cannot be fully revealed at this time, but will be forthcoming when the time is right. The transfer is being protested by the Grand River Mohawks because they can show that they still have the deeded title to this land according to an agreement that was made even before the land was known as the country or the corporation of Canada. No one has the right to transfer any land to anyone because this land was never surrendered, nor were there any negotiations involving the traditional and natural guardians of that land. There are two terms that need to be clarified at this point. The Province of Ontario website describes the 6 nations of the Grand River. According to their page, these 6 nations are the Mohawk, Seneca, Oneida, Cayuga, Onondaga, and Tuscarora nations. On that same page, there is a link to land claims, where people can view all outstanding land claims. Strangely, the Mohawk land claim is not present, because the debt is not acknowledged, although it can be proven. An article by Jim Windle, appearing on the Two Row Times News website on January 26th, writes the following. The second of two consultation meetings on the Brantford land transfer was held at the Grand Valley Church on Powerline Road on Thursday evening. As in the first meeting last week was at Lions Park, it was full to the walls, and both Mayor Ron Eddy, representing the county of Brant, and Chris Friel, representing Brantford, were grilled by residents unhappy with the addition of Tutela Heights to the transfer of land from the county to the city. Existing residents fear that high-density development would ruin the aesthetic appeal of their homes and therefore negatively impact the value of their property. As far as the residents are concerned, this is their major issue. However, as many are now beginning to learn, the issue is much bigger than only this. One elder of the Grand River Mohawks, Jan Longboat, appeared to be reflecting the language of a letter put out by the chief of the Mohawk Wolf clan earlier in the week when she spoke at the meeting. She was quoted as saying the following. First of all, I would like to say that we are not citizens of Canada, and would you please refer to us as the Indigenous people of these lands, she began. My family has lived at Grand River ever since we came here with Joseph Brant in 1784. The Haldimand Deed, or Proclamation, predates the creation of Upper Canada, which was 1791. Canada didn't even exist when our people came to this territory under the Haldimand Deed. The Mohawk lands were deeded to them for their guardianship before Canada came into existence, and thus the Canadian government has no right to expropriate these lands from the Mohawks. Yet, this is exactly what they have been doing, with numerous big cities and a large industrial presence upon these lands with no compensation paid to the Mohawks. This is what the Grand River Mohawks are able to prove. At present, there is a massive outstanding debt owed to the Grand River Mohawks, a debt that was formally acknowledged by a former mayor of the city of Brantford, but has not been acknowledged by the provincial government of Ontario nor the federal government in Ottawa. Where it may get a bit confusing for listeners is in understanding the process of conflict, but also the process of resolution. We have numerous corporate entities and one major global corporation involved in the lands that have been deeded for guardianship by the Mohawks. These entities operate under the commercial jurisdiction of Admiralty law. Although there is an extremely large amount of funds that are owed to the Mohawks, with interest resulting from monies that have been taken without permission from accounts that were holding Mohawk funds in trust, the primary issue is not so much about the money, but more about the land itself. The Mohawks have determined that it is more important to secure the lands that are rightfully theirs, while also helping other Indigenous nations to secure lands that lawfully belong to them, so that all Indigenous nations can begin to work together, and also along with any allies, to recreate a healthier, more peaceful, and more earth-honoring prosperity that will benefit those choosing to live in ways that honor the great tree of peace. More information will be forthcoming next week. In other geopolitical news, another sign that the U.S. is in trouble as far as its geopolitical clout is concerned is that it continues to lose ground that it has historically controlled for years, if not decades. Sputnik News has reported on January 24th that the heads of Russian and Egyptian trade ministries will agree to establish an industrial zone in the Suez Canal as part of an array of agreements to be signed next week, the Egyptian Ministry of Industry said on the 24th. A Russian-Egyptian committee is scheduled to meet from January 31st to February the 2nd, and according to the article, a number of protocols of understanding will be signed, the most important of which will be the signing of a protocol on the establishment of a Russian industrial zone in the Suez Canal area, the ministry said. The Egyptian ministry said the Russian Direct Investment Fund, the RDIF, would sign agreements with Egyptian banks to seek financing for future investment projects. Members of 60 of the largest Russian companies interested in entering the Egyptian market are expected to accompany the Russian delegation. In another article, Sputnik also reported on the 24th that the foreign ministers of Arab states, India's External Affairs Minister, and the League of Arab States Secretary General issued the so-called Manama Declaration after meeting in the Bahraini capital on the 24th. There appears to be a growing alignment that recognizes Iran now that Iran has aligned with Russia. Part of the declaration emphasized the importance that cooperative relations between Arab states and the Islamic Republic of Iran be based on the principles of good neighborliness, non-interference in internal affairs, respect of independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity, resolution of disputes through peaceful means, this according to the UN Charter and international law, and refraining from use or threat of force. Iran and Saudi Arabia have been at odds over several events in both countries designed to create further tension and unrest between the two over which country will be leading the Arab region forward in the future. In financial news, if you listen to most of the major mainstream business pundits in the U.S., of course they are saying the U.S. dollar is strong, that the U.S. economy is strong, but it is China that is heading into a major recession. There are writers like Michael Snyder from the Economic Collapse blog who seem content to focus only on the negative. His article from January 25th has him commenting that economic activity is slowing down much faster than the experts anticipated. Again, from his perspective, that may very well be true. To rephrase that sentence in another way, it might sound something like this. The new financial system that is being set up and is taking hold much faster than experts had anticipated. I say that, again knowing that a statement like that is relevant to one's own perspective. Many listeners, myself included, have been waiting a very, very long time for these changes to occur, perhaps since the day one realized that 9/11 was a false flag lie. The cabal has been dreading the day that their bubble would burst and that the world would learn about everything that they have been doing to humanity and to the planet. So whether things are happening more slowly or more quickly really depends upon how one is choosing to see the world, meaning from the old paradigm to the emerging new paradigm in geoeconomic affairs. One change that has been a long time coming that has now come into place this week are the 2010 reforms of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. The announcement was made this week by Managing Director Christine Lagarde.
Well, I'm really pleased that the historic reform of the IMF has now taken place and can be rolled out. This is the 2010 reform, which is finally being completed. It's going to bring about two major changes. One, a much better representation within the board. And second, it's also going to double the quota, that is the resources that the IMF can mobilize in case of difficulty of any of our members. It restores certainly the representativeness and the credibility of the institution, and I would like to commend the membership for having completed this reform.
Coming only 6 years late, the reforms have been stalled as long as possible by the U.S. Congress. The U.S. has been exercising its veto power for all these years to prevent these reforms from being implemented. One may feel inclined to ask what has changed then if these reforms are now activated. It is unclear at this time if the U.S. Congress finally surrendered and approved the changes, or whether the IMF took unilateral action on behalf of the members to implement the reforms without the formal acceptance of the U.S. Either way, what it does seem to represent is an increasing reduction in the economic power of the U.S. as a result of its increased isolation on the geopolitical stage. In other words, yet another not-so-subtle hint that U.S. power is sinking on numerous fronts. Sputnik News may have provided the hint in what happened. Sputnik reported on January 28th that in order for the proposed amendment on reform of the Executive Board to enter into force, acceptance by 3/5 of the Fund's 188 members, or 113 members, having 85% of the fund's total voting power is required. As of January 21st, 2016, 149 members, having 94% of the total voting power, have accepted the amendment. According to RT, the 2010 IMF reforms called for an increase in China's voting share from 3.8% to 6%, while the U.S. would see its share shaved slightly from 16.7% to 16.5%, and the U.S. would preserve its veto. The reforms were part of President Obama's effort to keep China happy and within the Bretton Woods system, but stalled in Congress over Republican concerns. The U.S. is the biggest member of the IMF and is the only one to have a veto, with a 15% being the threshold for securing a veto. Despite the increased quotas, BRICS countries will still only have a 14.7% voting share, just under that threshold for a veto. The BRICS Post article noted that 4 emerging market countries, Brazil, China, India, and Russia, will now be among the 10 largest members of the IMF. There are those who may argue that the activation of the reforms is symbolic, and there may be truth to this. The U.S. still retains its veto on paper, but something seems to have fundamentally shifted within the organization. Russia and China have both launched their own development banks to compete with the IMF, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and the Bank of International Settlements. Both Russia and China are also implementing international money transfer systems to compete with the current SWIFT system of international money transfer. What is unclear is whether or not the board of the IMF recognizes that the writing is on the wall and that they are going to have to play ball with the BRICS alliance and the growing weight of so-called emerging countries if the IMF is to retain any degree of legitimacy on the global stage. The recognition of these reforms may suggest that the IMF now sees that it needs more friends than it does foes. This, however, does not exclude the possibility that this increase in quota is also a trick to get more countries into deeper debt enslavement, with bailouts resulting from the current oil pricing situation. Some sources are calling it a crisis, although I and many listeners will know that somewhere along the way something is being manipulated, even if it is not yet exactly clear what that is. As most listeners know, it is the banking bailouts that have destroyed countless countries, including Greece and Ukraine. International funds go to pay off criminal bankers for their fraudulent investment schemes, while leaving the poorer taxpayers to pay off those activities. This is what the people of the world are no longer tolerating nor accepting. What may seem unusual to some is to find out that recently, on January 18th, Christine Lagarde met with Pope Francis. This was reported on the Vatican Radio website. Perhaps also unusual is that Pope Francis met with Iranian President Rouhani on the 26th, and then with Leonardo DiCaprio on the 28th. So the head of the IMF meets with the Pope on the 18th, and shortly after this announces to the world that 6-year-old reforms have finally been implemented. Some may wonder why the head of an international banking institution would meet with the Pope. Well, longtime listeners will already understand that the Vatican sits on some of the greatest wealth of the world, much of which has been extracted from poorer countries that the Church has historically been claiming to serve. One source has speculated that Pope Francis has agreed to transfer its large cache of wealth towards a global debt jubilee. One possible sign to look for in the near future that may support this claim is an announcement that Pope Francis plans to retire, allegedly for health reasons. It is understandably very challenging, especially for new listeners, to grasp the possibility that a new financial system is being constructed when all they have heard for their lifetime has been about this now archaic system of global finance. While the West and its media outlets attempt to blame China's alleged economic downturn for the problem currently affecting the global economy, they also are not prepared yet to acknowledge that the so-called downturn is merely a movement away from a corrupted system of financial enslavement toward another system that appears to be gaining greater and greater global recognition. As has been mentioned on CVN previously, it is highly unlikely that after so many years of being ignored, that the IMF would first welcome the Chinese currency into its global basket of reserve currencies and now give China and other BRICS countries increased influence in the management of the IMF if China was doing as poorly as business pundits and media seem to be claiming. On January 17th, Dara Ranasinghe of CNBC reported the following. As Beijing eases control over its currency and opens up its financial markets to foreign investors, the yuan is gaining ground as a global currency and is headed for further gains. I could be wrong, but how I might interpret that statement, perhaps in another way, is as follows. As Beijing removes itself from the older, obsolete Western banking structure and breaks away from the Western tools used to control international currencies and opens up financial markets to foreign investors who are willing to accept the yuan, reject the US dollar, the yuan is gaining ground as a global currency and is headed for future gains. The article continues. The yuan, also known as the renminbi, hit a record high of 6.2124 against the US dollar this week, and analysts said the currency is at its strongest level since China's government unified official and market exchange rates in 1993. The significance here is not the trend in the yuan, which has been slowly edging up ever since China dropped its currency peg against the dollar in 2005, but the growing use of the yuan internationally, said China watchers. What this means, essentially, and it is what CVN has been reporting for a long time now, that the movement to ditch the US dollar as a global reserve currency has finally hit the mainstream. Although analysts are cautious about saying it, they are now at least strongly hinting it. The article continues. Data released last week by SWIFT, a global transaction services organization, showed that international payments in China's yuan soared 24% in November from the month earlier and hit a record 0.56% of the global total. Now, many will argue that 0.6% of the SWIFT total in Chinese yuan is nothing, even with the 24% rise. Someone trying to argue for maintaining the status quo might attempt to use this as an argument. For a country that is allegedly in a recession and allegedly responsible for the crash of the global markets, it does seem perhaps unusual that the Chinese currency would not only rise in international use but also be speculated to attain the status of a world currency, which has already happened with the inclusion of the yuan in the IMF basket of reserve currencies last month. The article also notes that countries with close trade links with China have been leading a push to use the yuan in global transactions because it lowers costs and currency risks for companies. Australian businesses are increasingly settling their Chinese trade in yuan rather than US dollars, according to an article in The Australian this week. China is Australia's biggest trading partner. Despite the other news reported moments ago about the IMF, a report on Sputnik News appears to capture a story that has not been observed by the Western media. This article reported on the 23rd that the United Kingdom's potential exit from the European Union, a term that has been given as Brexit, and the European refugee crisis are among the International Monetary Fund's top concerns. This according to Christine Lagarde when she spoke on the 23rd. What this might suggest, if one was to read between the lines, is that the IMF, which is the U.S.-dominated global banking institution because the U.S. has veto power, is now concerned that one of its primary allies, the UK, could be breaking away from the EU cabal structure known as the European Union. In recent comments to the EU Parliament, leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage, had this to say to the incoming leader of the Netherlands as he began his 6-month term as EU parliamentary president.
As we welcome the Dutch Prime Minister, Mr. Rutte, to the hot seat of the 6-month revolving presidency, I note you're a keen historian, because you were quoting Winston Churchill at us this morning, as indeed Mr. Verhofstadt backed you up. You're quite right. Post-war, Churchill did encourage integration, especially between France and Germany, but made it absolutely clear at all times that the United Kingdom should not be a part of it, and I would like you please to acknowledge that. I also very much doubt that 50 years after his death that Churchill would approve of the club the way it is, because he was a Democrat. This EU faces an existential crisis. Indeed, there is an outbreak of a contagious disease. It's not a new one. The Greeks first came across it a couple of thousand years ago. The virus in its new form began in Denmark in the early 90s, but was put down with a heavy German hand. There have been a couple of outbreaks in Ireland, but substantial European money again cured the outbreak. But the red alert in 2005, when the contagion swept the Netherlands and France, frankly has never gone away. And I think now we have simultaneous outbreaks of the disease. In Denmark it now looks to be wholly irreversible. And in my own country, despite decades of our political establishment denying its existence, a recent opinion poll showed that sufferers may now be actually in a majority. What surprised me about your speech, as the Dutch Prime Minister, is you didn't mention the fact that 427,000 of your own citizens have outed themselves in public, declared themselves to be carriers, called a referendum for the 6th of April, and encouraged the rest of the country to join in. I suppose it must be embarrassing for you. The diagnosis, by the way, will not be popular in this House. The disease is called democracy. And people want to have a say on their future. Mr. Juncker here says that there'll be a continental crisis if the Dutch vote no. Well, I'll drink to that, is all I can say. When you add to that Schengen, when you add to that people's utter revulsion at what happened in Cologne, I think that you're going to have a very, very hot time over the course of the next 6 months. Whether we can, the peoples of Europe, break this union between now and the end of June, I don't know. But I tell you what, we're going to have a damn good go.
There have been hints that the UK and other countries have been becoming increasingly reluctant to participate in games that have been sponsored by the US and perhaps also by Israel. At least several countries have begun to voice displeasure at having to continue to support US sanctions against Russia at the expense of their own national economies. The world is beginning to understand that this alleged refugee crisis is in fact not a crisis in humanitarian terms, but rather an orchestrated event to break down the increased disease that Farage spoke of, the push for the people to exert their democratic voice on national levels. A second Sputnik News article on the 23rd also identified the potential risk of a UK currency devaluation. Now, this may or may not be strategic. China has already begun making certain demands that countries are expected to meet if they are to be accepted as potential trading partners with China. A rumored devaluation may be necessary to bring the currency value into alignment with a new global standard. Some are saying a gold standard, although there is also speculation that this standard may be broader to include other metals and possibly resources. This may come more clear over the coming months. UK Prime Minister David Cameron is facing a difficult time, however. A January 27th article appearing on the Canary News website reports that both the government of Wales and Scotland recently attempted to shoot down recent UK trade union legislation, with Wales appearing to have more success at this time in challenging that legislation. According to the article, David Cameron's trade union bill has already been branded potentially illegal by his own human rights watchdog, and been partly defeated by the Lords for disrupting the political balance in the UK. Now the democratically elected Welsh Assembly has refused him permission to impose it on Wales, and David Cameron, displaying his typical contempt for democracy, said he couldn't care less. This, therefore, would be a clear demonstration of why the disease known as democracy is breaking out faster than the man-made Zika virus that the cabal is attempting to scare people with at this time. Turning to disclosure-related news now, has the threshold for the disclosure of our galactic families now been crossed? Something seems to have shifted significantly, and it appears that there are positive forces now working in Washington to promote the disclosure of our galactic families. Of course, they are not yet calling them galactic families, still choosing to use the more fearful term of aliens. Earlier this week saw the return of the X-Files, perhaps with greater anticipation this time around because of the greater number of people who are now following the issue of ET disclosure, but also the numerous issues that some choose to lump under the category of conspiracy. Although there are some possible concerns to simply observe with regard to the program itself did not appear to disappoint in terms of at least hinting at numerous cabal-engineered events for the purposes of controlling humanity and profiting from the destruction of our planet. I can address these a bit more later. In what may seem like a coincidence, but it's most likely not a coincidence, the CIA released a large group of their X-Files right around the time the TV program came to air. From the CIA's own website comes a web page with the title, "Take a Peek into Our X-Files," and posted the following message. The CIA declassified hundreds of documents in 1978 detailing the agency's investigations into unidentified flying objects, UFOs. The documents date primarily from the late 1940s and 50s. To help navigate the vast amount of data contained in our Freedom of Information Access UFO collection, we've decided to highlight a few documents both skeptics and believers will find interesting. Below, you will find 5 documents we think X-Files character Agent Mulder would love to try to use and to try to persuade others of the existence of extraterrestrial activity. We also pulled 5 documents we think his skeptical partner, Agent Dana Scully, could use to prove there is a scientific explanation for UFO sightings. The more knowledgeable disclosure followers will be better able to discern the meaningful information from the less meaningful information, and possibly also from any disinformation that may be included in these particular files. Keep in mind, we are dealing with the CIA, even though there are rumors to be 2 factions within the CIA, one that is still connected to the global cabal and one that is allegedly trying to work for the betterment of humanity and the planet. The publication of the information caught the attention of many very quickly, and the links were shared around numerous social media networks. The information was also picked up by several media outlets, including RT and the Huffington Post. However, it was the program itself that disclosure fans were anticipating to see how far the creator of the show was willing to go to address so many of the issues that have come into greater awareness since the show went off the air roughly 14-15 years ago. The program, as I said, did not appear to disappoint. As a journalist, the funniest clip, for me personally, came fairly early in the program as the Truth Squad journalist Tad O'Malley attempts to convince Mulder and Scully of the importance of what he is standing for.
I'm not some Johnny-come-lately to the UFO phenomenon, Mr. Mulder. Like yourself, I'm a true believer.
No, I only want to believe. Actual proof has been strangely hard to come by.
You ran the X-Files. You were the X-Files. You all but wrote the book.
I'm afraid that book is closed.
As are the X-Files. For better or worse, we've moved on with our lives.
Yes, we have. For better, for worse.
Well, that's beside the point.
What is the point, Mr. O'Malley? And how's a man with your conservative credentials count himself a believer in UFOs and 9/11 false flag conspiracies?
I take it you think my message is disingenuous?
Conspiracy sells. It pays for bulletproof limousines.
You think I do it for the ratings?
I think you're the O'Reilly factor with a shop-worn little gimmick.
What Bill O'Reilly knows about the truth could fill a 9-dropper.
Mulder brings up the very point that many alternative journalists like myself have to wonder. The creator of the program, Chris Carter, has stated publicly that much of the material comes from Alex Jones. Many in the alternative news profession, myself included, take exception with the fact that Jones presents his material with a high level of fear-mongering and perhaps even war-mongering, while never addressing the more positive or higher meaning messages that come with the truth now being revealed. O'Malley's character is an extremely wealthy, well-connected journalist with a polished news program, and so is Alex Jones. Jones has connections to a company called Strat 4, and this company is linked to the Zionist faction of the global cabal. The servers used by Jones's website have been connected to Strat 4, and this makes for at least a reasonable question, if not reasonable argument, that Jones has ties to the global cabal. Was O'Malley's character a kind of quasi-promotion for Jones? The fact that both O'Malley and Jones are wealthy raises questions and possible concerns. To my knowledge, there are very few, if any, true journalists committed to peaceful global change who are wealthy or even close to it. Where Jones has a huge mansion, I don't even have my own place to live, for example. At the beginning of the show, we are introduced to a woman named Sveta, who claims to be an alien abductee. Scully is skeptical, but Sveta reveals a few things to Scully that begin to make her wonder, including the question of having alien DNA. It is revealed that Scully might know a bit more about abductions than she has been letting on, including personal experience. A little while later, O'Malley walks in on Scully at the hospital as she is drawing blood from herself, and she denies that she is testing herself for alien DNA. O'Malley then observes photos on the wall of children without ears. What is intriguing is the revelation Scully makes about where most of these children are found.
Testing yourself for alien DNA?
High cholesterol.
Sorry to barge in on you like this. It looks like you got quite a day.
The usual around here.
Doesn't look so usual to me.
It's a disease called microtia. Children born without ears.
You operate on these kids?
I assist the surgeons who are really doing God's work. Giving kids what their biology neglected.
So, it's a genetic deformity?
Possibly, but not conclusively. It's most common in Navajo Indians.
What's so striking is how alien it
I
looks.
assure you that is simply a random coincidence, Mr. O'Malley.
You mean unrelated to your previous work experience?
Far, far from that experience.
According to the website, discovernavajo.com, of the 562 federally recognized tribes, the Navajo Nation is the largest tribe, with a population of approximately 300,000 people living on the reservation and some living in the urban areas around the U.S. The land base of the Navajo Reservation covers 27,000 square miles of unparalleled beauty extending into the states of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. It is here you can step back in time and see how the ancient ones, the Anasazi people, the Navajo ancestors, and how they lived thousands of years ago. In September of 2014, RT had also reported that the U.S. has been forced to pay the Navajo Indigenous Nation a settlement of $554 million. One may be inclined to wonder if there is perhaps some kind of connection to this and what was heard on the X-Files. Mulder, coming back to the show, makes his way back out to Sveta's house, and she is surprised by his presence and how he got there. Mulder wanted to know more about the abduction, and this is where the information is slipped out that perhaps the abductions were not done by aliens themselves, but only humans using alien technologies. She then hits Mulder with the million-dollar question.
There was a moment you were being asked about your abductions, about your pregnancies, how the aliens took your babies, and before you answered, you looked at O'Malley. Why?
Because it's not exactly the right question.
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
Because I don't believe it's aliens who are taking them.
But you said you were abducted.
This is difficult. These are very difficult memories, and this is very dangerous answers.
Well, everything stays between us, so.
The things I've experienced, they've affected my entire life. They made it impossible to have anything like a normal existence.
And what are you afraid of?
That it only gets worse.
Sveta, who took your babies?
Men.
Men? Humans. You saw their faces?
Yes. And they took me aboard their ships. I was afraid they would kill me if I ever told anyone the truth.
Why didn't see a doctor?
Who can I trust? They would call me a liar when they're the liars.
You can trust me.
Who work for the government.
Technically, but not for years.
But you always wondered if they weren't lying to you too.
Faced now with a growing question of whether or not all that he has been told over the years was really true, Mulder returns to his old office to find all his old X-Files gone. His former boss walks in, and Mulder attempts to find out how much his former boss knew.
Where are they? The files.
I don't know where they are.
You said no one had been down here. It hadn't been touched.
Well, for 14 years since you and Scully left the Bureau.
I need access to the X-Files.
You tell me what this is about?
It's about controlling the past to control the future. It's about fiction masquerading as fact. Now, you owe me some answers.
You just calm the hell down, Mulder, before we both get pissed off. I don't take orders from you.
No. Who do you take orders from?
What do you think I called you? Because I was looking out for you like I've always looked out for you.
A decade of my life in this office. All the time I was being led by my nose through a dark alley to a dead end, exactly as they planned.
You're blaming me for that?
No, I'm blaming myself. Sure they lied to you too.
There hasn't been a day since you left that I haven't reached my phone to call you, Mulder, wishing that you were still down here. Since 9/11, this country's taken a big turn in a very strange direction.
They police us and spy on us, tell us that makes us safer. We've never been in more danger.
Do something about it, Mulder.
In the midst of this, there is a scene where Mulder is taken to a secret location where a group of engineers and scientists have constructed an anti-gravitational ship based on ET technology. Mulder sees firsthand what the technology is capable of doing. He asks how the ship functions, and the scientist mentions unum pentium. An article in the Huffington Post from August 27th of 2013 reported the following. New research confirms the existence of a super-heavy radioactive element with atomic number 115. Its temporary name is unum pentium, and as the element has yet to be named formally. The research was conducted at the GSI Accelerator facility near Darmstadt in Germany, where scientists are known for having discovered 6 other elements since the early 1980s. Evidence for element 115 was first discovered by Russian scientists in 2004, but additional research now has confirmed that the element's atomic number, the number of protons in the nucleus of one atom of the substance, is 115. Livermorium, number 116, unum septium, number 117, and unum octium, number 118, have since been added to the periodic table of the elements. At this point, Mulder is beginning to think he knows the full picture now, and seeks to reconnect with the doctor who was present at the time the ET being was found outside the craft that crashed at Roswell, and this doctor witnessed the shooting death of the being by a military officer. Mulder pushes this contact for more information.
I've been standing here for over an hour. I haven't seen a soul. I called you because you said if I ever put the pieces together that you would confirm. And have you put them together? I've met someone. Seen someone. Of course, you weren't even close. Warring aliens, lighting each other on fire, and other such nonsense. I was being cleverly manipulated. What brings this new clarity? I saw an ARV running on free energy. I saw it disappear. That's what they all seem to do. But the technology exists. It's existed since Roswell, and it's been in use. Being used on humans in human testing, the taking of men, women, and children that's misreported as alien abductions. So you believe you have the how? Yes, and I think I know the why. Why is more complicated than you may ever know, Mr. Mulder. 60 years ago, we were warned about the military-industrial complex gathering too much power. This is so new. The countdown has begun. It began in 2012, but no one knew. Tell me something new. Alien technology being used against us. Not by aliens, not with aliens, but by a venal conspiracy of men against humanity. It's wasting my time. What are the tests for? You tell me, Mr. Mulder. 10 years ago, you came to me saying you couldn't take your secrets to your grave, that you couldn't live with it. A man of medicine. I didn't know how my work could be used. The lies are so great, Mr. Mulder. The truth must be unassailable. Let me tell the world. They'll make a mockery of us. Let me take that bullet. And these men are capable of that. You're nearly there. You're close. Roswell, that was a smoke screen. So I've been told.
Mulder is now convinced that the alien thing was a cover-up and that O'Malley is allegedly the savior of Mulder, who has woken him up. This again seems to be trying to place a lot of credit with a certain real-time journalist who appears to have a highly inflated ego. Scully, meanwhile, is worried that this is pushing Mulder over the edge, and he tries to explain it all to Scully, starting with the fact that Sveta is the key to it all. Scully wants to leave, but O'Malley arrives and tries to help Scully understand it all.
I just need to get out of here.
Stay. It's important.
Don't tell me what's important, please. I just need to leave.
Wasn't she invited? I would have invited you, Scully, but I didn't think you'd come.
I shouldn't have come.
Then what are you doing here?
Mulder, what are you up to?
The tentacles reach far back into the last century. But it wasn't until victories in Europe and Japan and the onset of the Cold War that political and economic conditions became perfect for actual execution. A conspiracy bigger and more secret than the Manhattan Project. More odious and far-reaching. No sooner had we defeated Germany than a new threat started appearing in skies over America. Drawn to Earth by the latest threat to extinction, the H-bomb. Explosions acting as transducers, drawing alien life forms through wormholes in spaceships using electrogravitic propulsion. Advanced extraterrestrial species visiting us, concerned for mankind and the threat of our self-destruction, forestalling our annihilation through their own self-sacrifice, and crashes at Roswell, more importantly, places like Aztec. World leaders signed secret memos directing scientific studies of alien technology and biochemistry. Classified studies were done at military installations at F4, Groom Lake, Wright-Patterson, and Dulce. Extracting alien tissue. Tests were done on unsuspecting human subjects. Elaborately staged abductions and craft using alien technology recovered from the down saucers, including human hybridization through gene editing and forced implantation of alien embryos.
Why do such a thing and lie about it? Our own government.
Your own government lies as a matter of course, as a matter of policy. The Tuskegee experiments on black men in the 30s, Henrietta Lacks.
What are they trying to do?
That's the missing piece.
But it's not hard to imagine. A government hiding, hoarding alien technology for 70 years at the expense of human life and the future of the planet. Driven not only by corporate greed, but a darker objective.
The takeover of America.
And then the world itself, by any means necessary, however violent, or cruel, or efficient. By severe drought, brought on by weather wars, conducted secretly using aerial contaminants and high-altitude electromagnetic waves. In a state of perpetual war, to create problem, reaction, solution scenarios to distract, enrage, and enslave American citizens at home. with tools like the Patriot Act and the National Defense Authorization Act, which abridge the Constitution in the name of national security. The militarization of police forces in cities across the U.S., the building of prison camps by the Federal Emergency Management Agency with no stated purpose, the corporate takeover of food and agriculture, pharmaceuticals and healthcare, even the military in clandestine agendas to fatten, dull, sicken, and control a populace already consumed by consumerism.
And I encourage you all to go shopping more.
A government that taps your phone, collects your data, and monitors your whereabouts with impunity. A government preparing to use that data against you when it strikes. And the final takeover begins.
The takeover of America.
By a well-oiled and well-armed multinational group of elites that will cull, kill, and subjugate.
Happening as we sit here.
It's happening all around us.
The other shoe waiting to drop.
It'll probably start on a Friday. The banks will announce a security action necessitating their computers to go offline all weekend.
Digital money will disappear.
They can just steal your money?
Followed by the detonation of strategic electromagnetic pulse bombs to knock out major grids.
What will seem like an attack on America by terrorists or Russia.
Or a simulated alien invasion, using alien replica vehicles that exist and are already in use.
An alien invasion of the U.S.
The Russians tried it in 1947.
You can't say these things.
I'm going to say them tomorrow.
It's fear-mongering, claptrap isolationist techno-paranoia, so bogus and dangerous and stupid that it borders on treason. Saying these things would be incredibly irresponsible.
It's irresponsible not to say it.
Especially if it's the truth.
A lot of information is laid out on the line, and O'Malley's character seems to very much reflect the fear-mongering tone of Alex Jones, while not addressing any of the positive information relating to our galactic families. Information that has been coming out from other sources, including Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project and also the citizen hearing on disclosure, which took place in 2013, sponsored by the Paradigm Research Group. On January 22nd, an article by Lee Spiegel of the Huffington Post had written how the creator of the show, Chris Carter, felt that the show was going to be shut down, and at times he had been informed that he was getting too close to the truth. Although it should be celebrated that many very important and very key issues were brought out in prime time to a mainstream audience, there are still some concerns that a person would be wise to keep in mind. I have already mentioned a couple of them. There are very few people, if any, who truly know and understand the whole and complete picture of what is going on. Some may argue that the highest members of the global cabal, the most secret people, might know, but I would argue that they only know of everything that they have done to humanity and to the planet. At a soul level, they have forgotten who they are, and thus they are missing the pieces of why humanity and our planet is experiencing this from a more enlightened and divine perspective. Many people are connected to bits and pieces of the whole story, and like Agent Mulder, many might like to believe that they know the full story of what is going on and why. To that, I would say, highly unlikely, because to have that knowledge would make someone a profound threat to the cabal, and thus they would not likely be in the mainstream public, at least not yet. Over to tech news now, and it seems that we may just have a tech race unfolding. And although it is not a race to the moon, it may just be the kind of race that will allow the world to see which nation is truly and really committed to making positive change happen. The U.S. only has perhaps a 6-month head start, but a Russian investor is now looking at incorporating the Hyperloop transportation technology into Russia. An RT article on January 24th has reported that Hyperloop Technologies is in talks with a Russian investor to finance the possible building of a new kind of transport, the company's chief operating officer told RT at the World Economic Forum in Davos. It is likely the government will also be keen on the idea, he believes. A Russian private investor, whose name is being kept secret for now, is contemplating whether to fund the Hyperloop project for Russia, the COO said. So we're talking with a Russian private investor to basically have the first route in Russia, and we're analyzing different possible solutions between different cities. This according to the COO, his name is Gresta. You can connect Moscow and St. Petersburg in 35 minutes, he added. He wouldn't disclose the details of the deal, however, as no agreements have been signed yet. The only thing Gresta made clear is that the investor may not be the only one to finance the project, as the Russian government is interested in Hyperloop technologies as well. We're heading at the PPP, the Private-Public Partnership. Usually that's our model. We involve a private investor and then we ask the state to basically be involved. But it's a profitable business. For the first time, we have a system that is actually able to produce money, so it's not on the shoulder of all the citizens. Now, given how I have observed Russia's geopolitical moves over the last year, I might be inclined to think that Russia already has advanced technologies along these lines, but may be making the announcement in this way so that there are no sudden surprises to the general public and any sudden claims that Russia has stolen technology. It might seem like a very politically safe strategy to use to cut off all possibilities of a global cabal counterclaim that may shift the high global public opinion that Russia already has. For the techno geeks in the listening audience, those who are open to exploring new browsers for their computers will probably already know this, but for some who are seeking possible new solutions of browsers that may offer a bit more security, an article by Steve Dent on January 27th on the Engadget.com website may offer some insights. Dent writes that the best one might be the Linux flavor called Tails, recommended by none other than Edward Snowden. Its encrypted apps include email and messaging clients, a web browser, and of course the anonymizing Tor network. The folks behind the open source program have just launched version 2.0 with a new user interface and numerous security fixes. The article also notes that the update uses a new, more modern GNOME shell that gives it a more modern, simple, and actively developed desktop environment, according to the developers. At the same time, Tails 2.0 keeps the applications, places, menu, and Windows list front and center. In addition to fixing the security bugs and updating to the latest version of the Tor browser, which is version 5.5, the team also made services harder to exploit by sandboxing them and improved the shutdown memory wipe and sanitized the code by replacing custom scripts and replaced the Claws email system with IceDove, a Mozilla Thunderbird offshoot. Links to the Tails website for anyone wishing to learn more about this browser and possibly download it, as well as to information about IceDove email, will appear in the show summary for this story. An article appearing on the Event Chronicle website from January 28th has addressed two issues gaining attention lately. One was the issue of the UFO disclosures made by the CIA, which was spoken of moments ago. Another is the disclosure of information relating to other sources of energy. The article writes the following. Another related disclosure that did not merit mainstream media's attention is the recently declassified government's willful suppression of high-efficiency energy technologies through the all-encompassing justification of national security. In a document circulated in 1971, Patent Security Category Review List, a list of technologies were classified for state suppression, among which are the highly efficient solar power converters, the MHD generators, and the pulsed energy sources, as well as fuel cells. The article posts a photo of one part of the document that identifies at least 6 potential sources of energy. The article speculates that this Freedom of Information Access declassified list confirms the veracity of the Bedini and Bearden pulsed energy devices, among other free energy technologies that are already available on the web, and also hints that these two disclosures, having been released together, should imply the official lifting of the state-sanctioned ban on exotic technologies, and should now pave the way for the mass production of free energy devices that will facilitate even more the collapse of the petrodollar industry of the Khazarian Empire. The article also explains that this is the reason why those who are behind the systematic removal of the Khazarians from global power, this being China, oil-producing Iran, and India, they are all constructing next-generation Russian-designed nuclear fission-fusion hybrid power plants to power their industries and commercial centers during the transition towards the space age for the commoner Earthlings. The article writes about the Russian development of a hybrid fusion-fission nuclear reactor. Russia has apparently invited Chinese scientists to be involved. The people of the world are pretty much of the belief that nuclear energy is dangerous, and certainly in the hands of the global cabal, or the Khazarian mafia group, as this article identifies them, this power can be dangerous. In locations where there is extreme tectonic activity, a nuclear fission power plant may also be dangerous. The next generation, at first glance, does not appear to be as dangerous, however. The website diffin.com highlights the differences between the two types of reactions. The web page writes that nuclear fusion and nuclear fission are different types of reactions that release energy due to the presence of high-powered atomic bonds between particles found within a nucleus. In fission, an atom is split into two or more smaller, lighter atoms. Fusion, in contrast, occurs when two or more smaller atoms fuse together, creating a larger, heavier atom. With fission, a reaction does not normally occur in nature. Examples of fusion, however, occur in stars, such as with our sun. With fusion, very few radioactive particles are produced unless a fission trigger process is used. With fission, a critical mass of the substance and high-speed neutrons are required, while the fusion reaction requires a high-density and high-temperature environment. With regard to the amount of energy produced, the energy released by fission is 1,000,000 times greater than that released in chemical reactions, but lower than the energy released by nuclear fusion. The energy released by a fusion reaction is 3 to 4 times greater than the energy released by a fission reaction. The nuclear weapons that have mostly been used and tested in the past involved a fission reaction with radioactive waste being produced. Nuclear plants of the past have also been based on a nuclear fission reaction, a splitting of atoms resulting in a toxic radioactive environment. Fusion is currently the experimental technology for producing power. To attain a fission reaction, uranium is the primary fuel used, and this can only be extracted from mining the earth. To attain a fusion reaction only requires hydrogen isotopes, such as deuterium or tritium. One of the biggest problems with fission reactors is the nuclear waste. According to the article, the byproduct of fission is radioactive waste that takes thousands of years to lose its dangerous levels of radiation. This means that nuclear fission reactors must also have safeguards for this waste and its transport to uninhabited storage or dump sites. There does appear to be one huge advantage of fusion reactor technology. According to the webpage, if a fission reaction gets out of control, either it explodes or the reactor generating it melts down into a large pile of radioactive slag. Such explosions or meltdowns release tons of radioactive particles into the air and any neighboring surface. that being land or water, contaminating it every minute the reaction continues. In contrast, a fusion reaction that loses control, meaning becomes unbalanced, the reaction slows down and drops in temperature until it stops. This is what happens to stars as they burn their hydrogen into helium and lose these elements over thousands of centuries of expulsion. Fusion produces little radioactive waste. If there is any damage, it will happen to the immediate surroundings of the fusion reactor and little else. The mainstream media has been telling the world that negotiations with Iran have been about its nuclear program. It seems to be generally accepted, at least among those who are critically questioning global events, that the nuclear issue was not the real reason for the talks with Iran at all, although this may also in itself reveal what is going on over the coming weeks and months. For those who are drawn to the science behind the two kinds of reactions, the website also offers some of the scientific information relating to this energy and these types of reactions. Finally, in health news, as has been mentioned numerous times on this newscast, people are experiencing a number of different sensations during this period as the energies are ramped up to help push the shift in human and planetary consciousness at this time. Brianna Wiest, in a posting on the Thought Catalog website on December 27th, explores 16 uncomfortable feelings that actually indicate that one is on the right path. Wiest writes that discomfort is what happens when we are on the precipice of change. Unfortunately, we often confuse it for unhappiness and cope with the latter while running from the former. It usually takes a bit of discomfort to break through to a new understanding, to release a limiting belief, to motivate ourselves to create real change. Discomfort is a signal, one that is often very helpful. Her 16 signs of discomfort that indicate that one is on the right path are reported as follows. Number 1, a feeling as though you are reliving your childhood struggles. You find that you're seeing issues you struggled with as a kid reappear in your adult life, and while on the surface this may seem like a matter of not having overcome them, it really means you are becoming conscious of why you think and feel so you can change it. Number 2, feeling lost or directionless. Feeling lost is a sign you're becoming more present in your life. You're living less within the narratives and ideas that you premeditated and more in the moment at hand. Until you're used to this, it will feel as though you're off track, and you aren't. Number 3, left brain fogginess. When you're utilizing the right hemisphere more often, you're becoming more intuitive, you're dealing with your emotions, and you're creating. Sometimes it can seem as though left brain functions leave you feeling fuzzy. Things like focusing, organizing, remembering small details suddenly become difficult. Number 4, having random influxes of irrational anger or sadness that intensify until you can't ignore them any longer. When emotions erupt, it's usually because they're coming up to be recognized, and our job is to learn to stop grappling with them or resisting them, and to simply become fully conscious of them. After that, we control them, not the opposite way around. Number 5, experiencing unpredictable and scattered sleeping patterns. You'll need to sleep a lot more or a lot less. You'll wake up in the middle of the night because you can't stop thinking about something. You find yourself full of energy or completely exhausted, and with little in between. Number 6, a life-changing event is taking place or just has. You suddenly are having to move, or perhaps getting divorced, or a change in a relationship status. You may be losing a job or having a car break down, anything along those lines. Number 7, having an intense need to be alone. You are suddenly disenchanted with the idea of spending every weekend out socializing, and other people's problems are draining you more then they are intriguing you. This means you are recalibrating. Number 8, intense, vivid dreaming that you almost always remember in detail. If dreams are how your subconscious mind communicates with you, or projects an image of your experience, then yours is definitely trying to say something. You're having dreams at an intensity that you've never experienced before. Number 9, downsizing your friend group, feeling more and more uncomfortable around negative people. The thing about negative people is that they rarely realize they are negative, and because you feel uncomfortable saying anything, and you're even more uncomfortable keeping that in your life, you're ghosting a bit on old friends. Number 10, feeling like the dreams you had for your life are collapsing. What you do not realize at this moment is that it is making way for a reality better than you could have thought of, one that's more aligned with who you are, not who you thought you would be. Number 11, feeling as though your worst enemy are your thoughts. You're beginning to realize that your thoughts do create your experience, and it's often not until we're pushed to our wits' end that we even try to take control of them, and that's when we realize that we were in control all along. Number 12, feeling unsure of who you really are. Your past illusions about who you should be are dissolving. You feel unsure because it is uncertain. You're in the process of evolving, and we don't become uncertain when we change for the worst. We become angry and closed off. In other words, if what you're experiencing is insecurity or uncertainty, it's usually going to lead to something better. Number 13, recognizing how far you still have to go. When you realize this, it's because you can also see where you're headed. It means you finally know where and who you want to be. Number 14, knowing things you don't want to know, such as what someone is really feeling, or that a relationship isn't going to last, or that you won't be at your job much longer. A lot of irrational anxiety comes from subconsciously sensing something, yet not taking it seriously because it isn't logical. Number 15, having a radically intense desire to speak up for yourself. Becoming angry with how much you've let yourself be walked on, or how much you've let other people's voices get into your head, is a sign that you're finally ready to stop listening and love yourself by respecting yourself first. Number 16, realizing you are the only person responsible for your life and your happiness. This kind of emotional autonomy is terrifying because it means that if you mess up, it's all on you. At the same time, realizing it is the only way to be truly free. The risk is worth the reward on this one, always. It is probably a safe bet that many listeners have been feeling more than a few of these experiences. I can certainly see myself in a large number of them. So if so, then take heart, for it is very likely meaning that you are processing energies from your past, energies that need to be brought up, acknowledged, and then released for healing. Wherever possible, love yourself and forgive yourself, and acknowledge that you are complete in your own uniquely different, equally beautiful way at this time. In this week's final words, I would like to draw on some insights from an entity named Bashar in messages coming via Daryl Anka this week. I have to say it because there will always be new listeners who will be immediately tempted to put up a wall of resistance because they do not accept the source of information. I gently ask those listeners to consider any source with a degree of critical questioning, and I absolutely insist that you include this newscast in that category. Anything reported on this newscast is not true because it happens to appear on this newscast. As with any source, it is vital that one examine the message or information coming from the source, and one must determine for oneself if the message has something meaningful for one to reflect upon in one's own life path in the current moment of now. This particular audio segment was done sometime around the middle of last year and was uploaded to YouTube on August the 4th. It looks at what will unfold through to the end of 2016. You may observe, or possibly feel, that so many of the things that have happened so far this year are steps towards the autumn of 2016. I ask people to note very carefully Bashar's insistence that what he shares is not exactly a prediction, because there are many possible timelines that can unfold. What he points out is that given humanity's current level of awakening and humanity's current engagement on global change issues, the overall pattern suggests that certain things will unfold dramatically by the fall of 2016. This could change, depending upon whether or not more humans fall into the patterns of fear, resulting from numerous attempts by the global cabal to create situations of fear to push humans back into enslavement and thus under their control. Note also his explanations of definitions. This is a common theme, and it relates to the lives of everyone, and absolutely, I am included in this. As I evaluate my own life, I see patterns where I have been saying one thing, but perhaps I have not exactly been truthful with myself in believing that which I am saying or have been claiming for my reality. Now is the time to be moving oneself towards greater alignment with the shifting energies of these times. Symptoms may arise that were previously not present. In myself, for example, I am observing funky things going on with my eyes. I could perhaps be inclined to blame it all on the computer work that I've been doing over the years, and this may be true. It could also point to a symptom of something that I am refusing to see, perhaps in myself or perhaps in something relating to my life path. I have also suddenly begun having extreme sensitivity in one tooth. So much so I decided to go to have the tooth checked, but there was nothing physically wrong with the tooth. The doctor asked me if I was familiar with the meridian system, and I was. She explained that this particular tooth is linked to the left side of the brain, and that numerous people have come in recently with tooth issues on the left side. This tooth was also linked to issues relating to TMJ, temporomandibular joint dysfunction, and also to other physical symptoms that I have been experiencing. You may recall in the previous story the 16 symptoms of discomfort that one may be experiencing, and the one relating to left brain fogginess. Well, this tooth on the left side could possibly be linked to some of the issues that I've been experiencing with regards to focusing, concentrating, etc., especially where it comes to this newscast. Observe the message and note how you are feeling, and perhaps pay a bit of closer attention to the definitions you have set for yourself and whether or not greater reflection is required for your continued growth at this time. Create a wonderful week. Until our next Moment of Now, here is Bashar via Daryl Anka.
All right, we thank you for the co-creation of this interaction this day of your time. And we will begin this transmission by reminding you that we have titled it 2015 to 2016, the years of expansion and contraction. This next window of time on your planet is going to be one of high acceleration, but also high manifestation in physical reality of whatever energy state you choose to be in. Now, because of this particular shift in energy and shift in frequency, there can be a few things we can now begin to reveal to you about the upcoming changes that we sense in your energy patterns over the course of the next few years. As we have already mentioned in a transmission, the fall of 2016 will be a moment where everything will change. Everything will change. Now, what does this mean? As we have often said, of course, there is really no such thing as a prediction of the future because it is in flux. There are many probable realities. So what we are about to say is representative of the sensing of the energy in your collective consciousness and individual consciousnesses that exists right now in the present, that are beginning to build up such a strong momentum, such a strong degree of probability energy behind them, that they are unlikely to divert and very probably may begin to manifest in your physical reality, and as we have said, come to a head in the fall of 2016, or at the very least, begin to plant the seeds for things that will open up over the few years after that, and you will be able to see that when those things change, you'll be able to trace it back to the fall of 2016 to see where the change began. So you will be experiencing more immediate changes and some more long-term changes, but most of them will be able to be traced back to their beginning in the fall of 2016. What this means is, it is a very, 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 very good idea to get in alignment with yourself very quickly. First of all, you have to understand that if the idea of a healing brings you back into alignment, but you have a definition that it won't last, then it won't last. You will recreate the idea to let you know you're still holding on to a negative definition you haven't discovered yet, because it will push you to explore what that could be. Okay. And that, again, is part of the positive process of discovering more of yourself that you wish to change. You have to understand that affirmations are not enough. Because if you're saying, I am supported, but while you're saying that, you have a definition that doesn't actually allow you to truly believe that you are, to truly know that you are, then when you say, I am supported, you're actually amplifying the belief that you're not. So that's why we're saying when you make these affirmation statements, pay attention to the feelings and resonance within you as you say each of these things, because if you're truly honestly sensitive about what it is you're experiencing when you utter those affirmations, you'll be able to tell whether you're actually buying into them or whether you're just pretending to gloss over what is actually going on within your definitional system. And you cannot gloss it over. So it's all well and good to go and use a permission slip to heal you and give you a little bit of a breather so that you can work from a more positive space. But understand that by being in that positive space, it will do its job and bring to your attention anything that may still be lurking within your unconscious mind that is out of alignment with you, and so it will crop up to give you something else to deal with and find out what is the ultimate core definition that's going on here that you haven't let go of yet. So that, again, will be a part of your overall process of healing and discovering, healing and discovering, healing and discovering, healing and discovering. So, this is one of the things we are now aiding and assisting your world with in your exploration of spiritual and metaphysical concepts, is the idea that some of your definitions are in many ways, shall we say, old-fashioned, outmoded, outdated. And the very definitions themselves can cause confusion within you because of the way you're framing your questions, the way you're framing your perspective.
So that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, available on the blog on the website. CVN can also be followed through the Facebook page, Scene page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that being on a spiritual path does not prevent you from facing times of darkness, but rather how to use the darkness as a tool for personal growth. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.